In this section, we're going to finish our debug window project, which will allow us to print debug messages from scripts virtually anywhere in the project. We're also going to learn some new ways to access objects and learn about a screen's event and property context script threads. First, I'm going to take our button and our text box. I'm just going to kind of move it down to the bottom of the screen where we can kind of make some enhancements to it. So first, I'm going to make this text box a lot bigger, make it a little wider, and I want to put a border around it just so we can kind of see where the bounds are. So on our properties, under appearance, we're going to set our border width to 2. Maybe make this a little bit wider. Now the script we created a few lessons ago merely changes whatever text is in the text debug to hello world. What we need to do is, rather than just replace the text, we need to append the text. So we will create a variable. We use a let command, call the variable debug text, and we're just going to set it equal to whatever is already in the text box. Next, we will just set the text equal to debug text plus, and if I just leave it like this, we're just going to have a bunch of run-on words. What we want to do is have it drop to the next line every time a new message comes in. That's going to make it clearer, easier to read. In JavaScript, they use the same control characters that we do in C. So what we want is called a newline or a carriage return newline. So we can use \r\n plus whatever our message is. So these are called control characters. The R is called a return. The /n is either a new line or a line feed, depending on how old you are. It's basically going to append text down to the next line. So let's take a look at what this looks like in runtime. We'll go to our JavaScript page, and when we press the button, you see that it just appends the text to the new line. Now it's the same text, and that's not that helpful. What we need is a generic debug function that we could send debug messages to from any script on the page, and it is going to end up here. So let's go back to the programming environment, and I'm going to introduce you to a concept called script context. Each screen has 2 script threads or contexts, one for properties and one for events. And we've been primarily working with the event context. So if we go back to our button, notice that there is a button in the script editor called global definition. So in this area, and this is for the events context, we can define our own functions, and we can call these functions from anywhere on this screen as long as I'm on the event context. The properties scripts, these are scripts that are triggered by property changes, have their own context, and you can't really pass information back and forth between your property context and your event context. This is done for script handling and allows a more efficient execution of scripts when your screen is shown in runtime. So right now we're going to deal with the event context. And let me do a couple of examples. Let's say that for this particular screen, we're using the value of pi out to 5 digits, and we don't want to have to encode the value of pi in all these various scripts that are using it. So we want to create a constant. So we can just declare a constant pi equal to 3.14159. So this is a constant, and I can call this pretty much from any script, and it'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to grab a button, and I will do print pi for the text. And then on events, I'll go directly to JavaScript, and we're going to print out to our debug. I will go to my auto completion, and I'm going to show you something new here. We've been using findItem to define the item that we want to interact with, but there is something new called items, and this is a list of all the items on the screen. The difference is there's a special key combination, CTRL+J, that I can hit that will list all the objects on the screen, and I can just select them. This is as opposed to find item, where I actually just have to type in the name of the object that I want to access. And again, this is new in version 17. And so instead of typing my text debug, I can just kind of pick it out of a list. They have similar functionality for tags. So going forward, instead of using find item, we're going to be using the new items list. So we can just say screen items text debug, and we also have the list of all the properties for whichever object we get. So we can just say screen item text is equal to the value of pi is plus, and I can just do pi. And it's going to know about pi because notice that the global definition here looks exactly the same as it did on this other button. That's because it is globally defined, so you will see this on every object. So we'll save this and check it out in runtime. We'll go to our JavaScripting page, and there's our value of pi. But notice that it doesn't change here, and that's because we didn't put the code in to append. So now we're going to use the event context on the JavaScripting page to create a generic debug function that we can just send debug messages to from any script on the page, and it'll automatically handle appending and doing things like that. Going back to our development environment, we can go back to the event context, and it doesn't matter really which button we go to, but we'll go to global definition. So now we're going to write a function, and I'm going to add a comment. This is going to be our Debug Window Write function. And writing a function in JavaScript, we use export and we say function. And let's call this Debug.Write. And we have to give it some arguments. And again, JavaScript is mostly data type agnostic, so we don't have to put in the data types here. For our Debug.Write, let's just say that we're going to give it a message. And then we put curly braces to enclose the body of the function. So here, since we know that we're going to be using the text debug text box, we can just put that in the function. No need to really send that in. And we can say let debug text box equal, and we can do screen.items and CTRL+J. There's our text debug. And I'm just going to leave that as an object reference. And then I'll copy this so I don't have to type it again. And we'll just say debug textbox.text is equal to debug textbox.text, which gives you your append. And then we'll do our control characters. And then just do plus message. So whatever we send into this should just print it directly here to the text box. So we'll save that, and then let's go back to the script function. We'll comment this out. There's our Debug.Write function, and we can just copy our message here. And let's test that out in runtime. So we'll just hit print pi, and it works. So there's a couple other things that we want to do to kind of clean this up. Going back to this environment, I'm going to go to the properties of our text box. And for horizontal alignment, I'm going to left space that. And for our vertical alignment, we can do top. That way it starts printing from the top of the window. Another thing that we would want is a way to clear the messages. So let's grab a button and we can just put it down here. And for our text, we'll just put clear. Going back to the scripting here, if we go into our global definitions, let's create a function to clear the text in this box. And I'm going to leave that to you as a challenge. So what I would like you to do is create a function called Debug.Clear that when it's called, it simply clears all the text out of this box. So go ahead and hit pause on the video, complete the challenge, and then come back and I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to use Control-C, and I'm just going to kind of update stuff that I want to update in here. So this is the clear function, and I'll change the name to Debug.Clear. We don't really need a message, and if I create a reference to our text debug, then we can just say debugbox.text is equal to nothing, or an empty string. So we'll save this, and then if we go back, we're on our clear button, we can just write Debug.Clear, and it should clear our messages. So we'll save and go to runtime. So we go to our JavaScripting page, and we're going to put a lot of text in here, and if we hit clear, then it clears it out for us. So now we have a set of functions, and we can use this kind of generically anywhere on the page. So going back to our read tag, we could just comment this stuff out, and we can look at our global definitions here, again, because these are all on the same event context. So if we need to take a look at the function and remember how to call them, we can just say Debug.Write, and we'll just copy this string, and we'll take a look at runtime. And back in runtime, you can see that the read tag also prints to this screen. So we kind of have a nice generic function we can just call Debug.Write or Debug.Clear. The problem is it only works on this one screen because we've used the event scripting context that is only on the screen. And we can't really share these functions between screens. So how is this useful? Well, the next concept is we also have global functions, and these are functions that run outside of screens. So we can move these functions into the global namespace and create our own pop-up window that has these debug controls and create something that will allow us to print debug messages no matter what screen that they're on. So that's what we're going to do next. So back in our development environment, the first thing I would like you to do is create a new screen and call it Debug Window. And the screen that I've created is 400 by 600, and it simply has a text box. The name of that text box I've just called Text Debug, just like our other one. And we have a clear button. So what I would like you to do is pause the video and build this screen. So now that you have your screen built, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to open our main screen. And on the main screen, I want you to add a button, and we'll make the text Debug Window. And we are going to open the Debug Window screen in a pop-up when this button is pressed. So I'm going to also leave that as a challenge to you. So go ahead and complete the challenge. And when we come back, I'll show you how I did. We'll go to Debug Window, and on Events, we can't just use the system function if we want to. We'll choose Open Screen and Pop-Up. And this is going to be important, this pop-up window name, because we're going to need to know that name if we're going to call this from a global function. So let's just call it Debug Window Main. And then the screen name that it is going to show is simply going to be your debug window. And then for the header, script debug window, and then we'll just save. Now I'm going to show you where the global scripting is done, and it's just in your project tree, and it's under scripts. So we can create a new global module. So go ahead and double click that. And we can also rename this. So I'm going to do a right click and do rename. and I'll just name this debug. And if we expand this, we've got a wizard to add a new function and also have a global definition area. So the definition area is where we can define constants or things like that. And one of the things that our global function is going to need to do is it's going to need to know how to get to the text box in our debug window. So let's create a constant to tell it where it is, and then we can refer to that constant and also change it if we want. So open the global definition area. In this window you have to start at the very top of the line. So let's create a constant called global debug window path and set it equal. And if we go back to our main and look at our debug window, the window name is called debug window main. So we'll go back here, we're going to make this a string, and we'll put a slash so that we're telling the path that it's going to start at the root screen. And we're going to put in the name of the pop-up window, debug window main, /, and here we have to give it the name of our text box, which is on the debug window. So I've named mine text debug, and you just have to make sure that you use whatever name that you used on your text box in the constant. So I'll go back to my global definition. And that should be the complete path. And this is why we're opening the pop-up window from main, so that we kind of know where we have started. So we're going to need to remember this constant here. I'll save this. And then we're going to add a new function. So we'll double click this. It'll create a function. And notice that our properties dialog has got the function name and the parameters also up here. But you can't type in this area, it's protected. That's why it's gray. So you have to name your function or your parameters down in the properties area. Also, if you don't have the properties dialog up, it may be a little confusing. You're trying to type and change the function name. You can't. You simply just have to pull up your properties. We're going to call this function write. I'm going to give us a new parameter, and I'm going to call that source. That is going to be the source of the debug statement that's being printed. So if your script is on a button, you might send it the name of the button. So that way, if you're doing debugging, you can tell where the message came from. And then our second parameter is just going to be our message, what is going to be printed out. And if you want other parameters, you can just keep adding them down here. Right now, we're cool. And in the body of our function, we'll just create a variable. So we'll just say, let debug window equal. And I can use the auto completion. And I'm going to use screen. And you might expect me, in this case, to use item, but the problem is screen items only works if you already are on the screen that you want to get the items from. And in this case, the global editor has no idea what screen you're on, but it does know the root screen. So since we did our global definition as a relative path, our first slash being the root screen, and then on the root screen, it's looking for the window called debug window main, which is our pop-up. And then on that screen, it's looking for the object name text debug. So this is kind of the method that we're using. You're going to need to use find item. We can just use our global definition here. So I'll copy that, come back to our function, and just paste it in. And that should give us a reference to the text box on our debug screen. Now all we have to do is say debug window.text is equal to, and I'll just copy this. So that gives us our append function, do a plus, and we're going to do our control characters, so /r/n, and I'm going to do a square bracket to the left and do plus, and this is where we're going to put our source. So our source will print out inside the square brackets, which will kind of make it easy to see. I think it wants me to put a space there. And then I'll close that string and we'll do plus message and semicolon. And I'll probably put a space here just so it's not right up against that square bracket. So this is going to give us a nice printout that is going to give us on the new line the source, which is contained in square brackets, plus whatever you want to print out. Now we'll go ahead and do our clear. So I'm going to just copy this code right here, I'm going to use Control-C. I'll hit save, and then we'll add another function. And again, we'll just do clear here. And for these parameters, we don't really need parameters for this, so I'll just do delete and delete. So our clear function, I'll paste in our other code and then set the debug window text to an empty string. And we'll save that. So now we have these two global functions, clear and write. Okay, so the next thing to do is to use these functions by calling them. So we'll start on the JavaScripting page. Now, on the read tag button, on our event context definitions page, and I like to put my import statements at the top, you just type import star, which is import everything, all functions, all constants, all variables, as, and you give it an alias, and so we'll just call this debug, lowercase d, and then from, and then as a string, it's going to be the name of your global module, which is this guy right here. So that will get everything from that module and allow it for use in the events context on this page. If you want to use it on another page, then you have to put this statement on that page. So we'll go back to our script code, and now we can just say Debug.Write. And if you recall, the first argument is the source. So the source is going to be button 8, that's the name. We could really put in anything that we want. So I can just put read tag, as long as it's a string, it doesn't care. And then the message is going to be this message here. And I'll save that, and then we can go down to our print pie button. So I can just do Debug.Write, and let's just call this the print pie button, and then our string that we're going to print, and close that out. Now we'll go back to our debug window, and we'll do the same thing. We have to put the import statement, and then in our code, just DebugClear. So let's test this out in runtime. So in order to see anything, we pull up our debug window, and we can just put it wherever we want. There's our print pie text, and you can see that it shows the source as well as our string. We can do our read tag, and that also works. And there's our clear function. So this works pretty nice because this window is going to float above everything, so I could have printouts on different pages, which we're going to certainly be doing, and they would all print out to the same thing here. So if you haven't been doing this exercise with me with a video, go ahead and pause the video and build your script debug window like we've done here. Add your global functions and global constants and get it working like I've got it here. If you need to go back and review parts of the video to understand it, then please do so. And then when you're finished, come back and we will finish this section up. Going back to the development environment, the last thing I'm going to do is on my debug text, I'll go back and set the properties that we did on our original one. So I'll set my horizontal alignment to left and the vertical alignment to top, just so it's pretty much the same. Okay, so I want to do one last example on event context, and it's actually a very important one because it covers a concept in scripting and programming called error handling, and it's going to show you how errors will affect your runtime application. So I want to open the main screen. So on the main screen, we have our navigation buttons, and they're changing the screen name that is being shown by our screen window object. And so I want to add a bit of functionality here. I'm going to grab a text box and just kind of place it up here. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can make it look nice. And I'm going to use my arrow keys to just kind of position this the way that I want. And the idea here is when we navigate with our buttons and this picture changes, I want to put the name of the picture in this text box. And so how do we do that? Well, you could go to the buttons themselves and add a script to change the picture and then also write the text in the text field, but that's kind of cumbersome, and if you have to make changes, that takes a while. But if we go to our screen window object and look at the properties, you might expect to go to the Events tab and see OnPictureChange event or something like that. But that's not where these events are. They're actually on the properties. So here's our screen property. It's by default set to welcome. This is the property that is changed by the buttons. If we expand this, there is a change event. If we do our drop down, then we have a script. And this script that we write will be triggered when the screen property value changes. And that's exactly what we want. So if we go to our global definitions, notice that we are still in the event context. Now you might have expected this to be the property context that we've spoken of, but it's not. It's an event. It just happens to be on the property page. Looking at this function, this is our screen main window display on property changed. Item is a reference to the screen window itself, and value is the new screen value that is changed. However, what you're going to find isn't exactly what you expect. So let's start by importing our global module for debug. So import star as, and let's just call it debug from debug. Okay, that gives us access to all of our functions. And if we go back to our script function, we can use our Debug.Write functions to find out more about these parameters that are passed in so that we can identify what we need to use to set our text box. So we can just do Debug.Write. And for our source, I'm just going to do item.name, which item is a reference to our screen main window display window object, so it should print out screen main window display. And I'll do a comma, and our message will be value equals value. And I'm going to copy this part because I will be using that on the next couple of lines. And let's see what item.screen is going to equal. Close the function out. And finally, there is an item.screen name. So there's our screen name, and I'll do our plus period. So you might think all these should basically be the same thing. And our Debug.Write utility is pretty useful so that we're not wasting time trying to write and debug code. We can tell exactly what these values are so we can tell what we need to put in our text box. So let's save this and just go on to runtime. So we'll throw the debug window up and navigate. So I went to the Performance Insight page. Value ended up being some big gigantic number. Item.screen ended up actually being the name of the page with the server prefix. HMI-RT1 is our runtime module. So that's got the right information in it. But item.screen name is actually the previous screen. So if I go to JavaScripting, notice that the screen name here is what we had previously, which is Performance Insight. So what are we seeing here? Value is a number, and I believe that they refer to screens as numbers just for language switching and things like that. And you would think it would be the same value as screen, but I think that the screen object probably takes that number and converts it into a screen name. That's why item.screen has your screen name. Now item.screen name, why is it the last screen instead of this one? I think that that property name does not get updated until this event has fired. But in any case, we now know what we need to use for our text box update. We need to use item.screen. So we will go back to our development environment. Go back to our script, and we can just do screen.items. Use CTRL+J for our browser. So text current screen name, that's our text box up there. Double click it, and we just want to set the text property of that text box equal to item.screen. Now one other thing, By default, the text in this text box is the word text. We're just going to default this to welcome because welcome is the default screen, so normally that's what it's going to be. And if you're following along, just make sure you give the text box a name, and it's going to make it easier to kind of pick out when you are searching for it. And let's just take a look in runtime. So we'll open our debug window. And as we navigate, now our text box will update to the name of the page we're navigating to. However, there is one issue that if you're following along at home, you may have noticed. Think about the debug function in our global module. It pretty much depends on this text box being available. And as long as it's available, you can see that we are navigating and the script is running, it's updating the page name. But if we close this and navigate, notice that our text box is no longer updating. Now, how can we find out what's going on? Well, if we open our trace viewer, we can see that we have some errors, and it's saying that it cannot read the property of text of undefined. That's basically because the global module cannot find our debug window, so it just stops running code. Well, so what this is telling you is if you have uncaught errors in your scripts, then the scripts may not work correctly. So we're going to need to handle that. Going back into the engineering environment, we will open our global modules under scripts, and we'll open our write function first. What we need here is to just test first whether or not we're able to access our debug window, and then if so, we go ahead with the write. So I'm going to right click, and under snippets, logic, we're going to do a try catch block. So I'm going to copy these two lines and put them under the try block. And then the catch statement is what do you want to do if it's not able to process these? And let's just print out the error. So I'll use our snippets again and just highlight here. And I will just print out EX, which is the message. So you would see that print out in your trace viewer. However, it's going to finish running the script no matter what, so whether the debug is up or not, we're still going to see our text box update. So let's take a quick look at that in runtime. So first I'll pull up the debug window, verify everything's still working. So we're getting our printouts. And now I'll close the debug window, and if we watch our text box, it is still going to update no matter what. And I'll just make our screen a little smaller so we can see the traces as they come in. And so we can see our trace here, global module error, that's our code, and it's giving you the text. However, most importantly, it's not stopping our script from running. So we have completed our script debug window project, and you can use this to print debug messages from virtually any script in your project. You may find this handy to put into your other TIA portal projects as you write scripts to create your visualization. In the next section, we're going to be doing some basic JavaScript exercises, so we'll see you then.